So today we have an interview with Jim Woods, an author, freelance writer, and writing coach who loves helping others and share and tell better stories. So welcome, Jim. I'm very happy to have you here on my podcast. And there's so many questions I'd love to talk to you about, but let's start with something about yourself, who you are,
Mhm.
and what you do, and what passions you have.
Wow, I love it. Thank you so much for having me, Diana. I'm a writer, first and foremost. I absolutely love stories. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm really a business owner because this is what I do full time. And I live in Ohio. I'm sure we'll get into just a little bit of my story a little bit later. But yeah, I've been doing this for close to 4 years now. It'll be 4 years in about a month. So yeah, 4 years of writing. It's been
Oh,
great.
that's
It's
so
been
great.
great.
That's
Thank you.
great. And I want to first and foremost come back to the major career change in your life. So
Hmm.
you have been working for 15 years as an accountant, and now you're a full-time writer, as you said, for about more than 4 years. What inspired you to do this big major career step?
Wow, what inspired me? That's fantastic. I think it started out. I didn't do what I planned to do. In college, like my goal, and even like when I was getting my degree in college, I wanted to be an FBI agent. That was my goal. I kid you not. I wanted to be an FBI agent. I'll admit it. I was inspired by the X Files of all things, um, and I wanted to be, working for the FBI. Well, as I was about to graduate, I went and met with the FBI. They were at like a local career fair, and I was talking to them, and they're like, and it was surprising because I met with them. I chatted with one of the representatives there, and he was just like, "No, your grades aren't good enough." And I'm like, "That's it? It all depended on just my grade point average and all that." And I didn't know what to do with that. I was like, "Well, this
Mhm.
was my plan. I didn't really have a plan B. I wanted, to be an FBI investigator kind of thing." And I just went with like the easiest path. And that was being an accountant. I had the degree. I wanted to do it for the FBI because you can go in like under different, specialties. Well, my specialty was going to be looking at the numbers, finding the crime kind of in the background through the numbers and all that. So, long story short, I just I went with the easiest path. I already had a job with my local city in the government while I was in college, and I just stayed with that. And another important part of my story, my dad is an accountant as well, and I had the degree. I
Mm.
was kind of just doing what my dad already did, and it was the easiest path. Well, eventually, I was dating a girl that's now my wife, and we were talking about, well, where do you want to live? Where do you want to go? Well, I applied for a job in Nashville, and I got it. And it was like, okay, moving from Ohio, where I grew up, to Nashville, moved down there, had a couple kids, living the comfortable life, but I was bored and I wasn't challenged. And I had a conversation with a coworker where he had a number like on his calendar, and he's like, he had like X's on his calendar, and he had a number like 458 or something random like that. And I said, hey, what's that number? And he's like, that's the number of days till I retire. And I'm like, what? And he was just marking off every day. And I realized I was like, I'm kind of doing the same thing. I'm just drifting along, having fun weekends, bored out of my mind at work,
Mm.
not enjoying it, not challenging myself, not really growing, just kind of, coasting along through the week. So once like I saw the end result was just retirement with an older coworker, that jump started me. I was like, something's got to change here. Something's really got to change. And that kind of just lit the fire. And I said, well, what do I really like to do? What do I really enjoy? And the answer really came back to story. I've written stories before when I was younger. I never was really into like English. I didn't like go over books that I really enjoyed in English class or in reading class, in school, high school, college. But then I was like, well, if I can pick versus having a teacher pick, then I really do like reading. I like stories. It was like the ones I picked out, I would always read a lot, and I've written a little bit. Like on vacation, I'd always get books that I'd pick out of the bookstore, and it just kind of relit my love for story. And so that was kind of the as you can see, it was like it's a trail, a journey of sorts. And yeah, it was like there were little mile markers on my journey. But once I honed in a little bit, and I was super hesitant to just say, hey, I just want to be a writer, because that sounded really narrow and small. And I pictured, writers, well, they have to have a sweater and a pipe, and they live in a cabin, and they use a typewriter. All these stereotypes just, flooded my mind. But it's like further from the truth. When you're actually a writer, you're probably working from home and coffee shops and using your computer, and you can literally pick the topics. So I think I think that's kind of my story in a nutshell. Was like there's a lot of freedom and a lot of opportunities to be a writer. So that kind of jump started me, I think, and also just where I lived at the time in Nashville. I think just from a story concept, setting is so important. So wherever you live, the setting helps your story. If you want to be a screenwriter, most of the time you have to live in LA or New York. And if you're like wanting to get into blogging, you have to have some kind of community around you. Mm-hmm. And that's where Nashville was so key. It was like the setting for my story. And I got to meet all these different writers and get encouragement from them and support and learn from them. And that's kind of my story in a nutshell. That's the shortest version I can give you.
Yeah, but it's so great. I love how you were brave enough to kind of do this transition. I just wanted to ask, because many listeners, I think that's what they want to do. They want to switch from day job to full-time writing. But how did you manage to do this transition?
Make
how did
that
you manage
jump, right?
Yeah. How did you do that?
It was a lot of small steps. I love connecting with people. Like literally, when I had the opportunity to chat with you, Diana, I was like, yes, this is great. I love talking to other like minds and just connecting with them. Through meeting people, for coffee, I met people every single day on my lunch hour in Nashville, like every single day. And I've told friends before, I'm like, I think that's what helped keep me sane to an extent, because I really didn't like my job, and I was depressed at the time, and I felt really bad. And when I was able to talk to other people and have that community, that established new relationships. It's like, instead of being surrounded by other people who are drifting through life, I was able to connect with other artists and other creators. So it's always been about individual relationships. And that's how I was able to land my first freelance gig, which is a writing gig that I even still have today, which it pays like a portion of my bills right there. So I have one super steady client, and I think it really does start with one client. And I just write blog posts for them or help revise their articles, that kind of thing. And all my other ones, honestly, I'm not finding these jobs through applying for them. I'm finding them through knowing friends, through having, community. And every time I start applying for like a job online, I'm like, look back at the history, look at the story here. Almost every single, like 99% of the jobs I've ever had in my 4-year career so far have been through relationships. So why try to, why not play to your strengths? Through connecting with people, email or Facebook Messenger, and just saying, hey, can I help you with this? And just being super helpful is probably the number one thing I would recommend to anyone else. You have to be helpful. I've been able to connect with so many people just by being kind and helpful, guest posting for other people. Be willing to work behind the scenes too. I think that's a servant attitude. Be willing to say, hey, you know what? Is there anything I can do to help you? If someone's really busy, they might just say, well, thanks. Well, if you come back and say, oh, you know what, can I help you, find quotes to help you fill up your social media? Can I help you repost some of your blog posts over on medium.com? really specific asks,
Mm.
then people can help. It's almost like if you were sick, Diana, and I said, hey, Diana, can I help you? And you'd be like, no, I'm fine, whatever. Hey, can I bring you some tea? Can I bring you a
Mm.
meal? It's much more specific. I think that's an important part of it.
I love that. I love that you want to be like uh, um giving the people specific help and specific things. You are not paid for that, right? But this is what how
No,
you
very rarely.
yeah. Yeah,
Very rarely.
but this
But
is
you're
how it
learning
starts,
and
right?
you're
Yeah.
learning, you're growing, and you're establishing that relationship.
Mm.
And like I wanted to leave my accounting job. It took me from 2011 to 2014 was the
Mhm.
time. Like I wanted to leave. I was like ready to leave now. I'm like, okay, I want to leave today. No, I couldn't. I had my family. I had some bills. I couldn't do it. So it was working, in the mornings, on my lunch hour, in the evenings, on the weekends. And that's where you can afford to do that free work and help
Mhm.
other people and, get that kind of that portfolio, get that resume built up and say, oh, I've done this, I've done this. Having a list of things that you've done where you have experience. I think
Mm.
that's a big step. It's like that's the one you can bridge that gap from jumping, from I'm
Mhm.
on this side over to here. Well, you can have some stepping stones in place and
Yeah, yeah.
have that relationship there.
Yeah, and I love that it was not a sudden jump, but it was like a gradual thing that happened over years, basically. Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about the struggles of writers and the writing life. So
Hmm.
so you see several main areas where you feel that writers struggle. And let's start
Yeah.
with writing habits, because this is probably the most important thing you can establish at the beginning of your writing journey. What habits do you have, and how can we manage to establish good writing habits?
Wow. A few of my writing habits are doing my own work first.
Mm.
That's a very important one. Um, I think that the real key is, and my friend Sean McCabe mentioned this to me, he calls it the focus triangle. Doing the same work at the same time with the same tool. So it's like you can really reinforce that habit.
Mhm.
So let's get more specific. Okay, let's say you're blogging. Okay, you're blogging probably on your computer. You'd want to use the same, tool, specifically like the same app. You could do it in Word, WordPress, doesn't matter. But you use the same app. So when you open that app, you know what you're going to do. You're going to blog. Well, when you do it at the same time, it becomes kind of like brushing your teeth. And you
Mhm.
can, do there's no question what you're going to do. And that's one of my big ones for me is doing my own work first. Because as a freelance writer, I can spend all of my time focused on helping other people and, working for clients and doing other things, or maybe doing coaching where I help somebody else. But I think you have to do your own work first. And that's a good way to kind of do the hardest thing first, because I think my own work's harder, frankly, than
Mm.
to work for somebody else, where they might have examples and you can kind of gauge from it, or you can always do research. But when you're doing your own work, it's like, okay, this is my playtime. This is my time to create. So for building writing habits, I think that a lot of it is doing it at the same time.
Mhm.
And for most people, I think it's like lunch hour is really great. I think especially if you're not an early bird, and if you have a full-time job, that lunch hour can be really good. When you're like, okay, what do I do in my lunch hour? I work on my writing. And it just becomes like there's no question about it, right? I think that that's a big part, and also just tying other good behaviors to it. So after you eat lunch, like it's tied to when you eat, or when you even have a coffee break and say, okay, I'm going to write now. And also just saying, it's okay if I only do 15 minutes.
Mm.
And it's okay, what I mean? Have a timer and just set it for 15 minutes and say, okay, 15 minutes of writing, that's what I'm doing. I'm setting the timer, go. when you set a timer for 15 minutes, as opposed to, trying to write every day for 2 hours, early in the morning, I think it's a lot like, you're not going to be able to run a marathon when you first start out. You might have to, run for 15 minutes or run for, a half a mile or some, smaller distance. I think that's the important part. And when you do that over time, you'll have some consistency, and you'll also, you'll develop your confidence, and you'll have good habits, and you'll be able to do a lot more, because if you try to do too much too fast, you can burn yourself out and just stop. And you'll be like, oh, no, I'm done. No, I'm not going to do that. It's too hard.
Yeah, and I also feel like when I have only 15 minutes or 20 minutes to write, I get more words on the page than when I know, oh, I have 1 hour or 2 hours, because then you tend to procrastinate or write slower. And yeah, I feel like the time pressure is sometimes very good for writing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that good pressure, right? Yeah, you can't go check Facebook and Twitter and do all these other things. Whereas I think you might want to do those things if you have like a couple hours of time, and then you're like, no, I'll get to this later, and you push it back off, right?
Yeah. Now that you've mentioned social media and stuff, do you turn it off when you write? Do you tend to put everything away and turn off your phone?
I do. I honestly try to avoid my computer. I know that sounds weird, but especially in the drafting process, when you're first doing that rough draft and, just really creating, I don't like to use my computer because I just find myself so easily distracted that I have this thing called the Alpha Smart Neo. And we can include a picture maybe, or a link to the picture. It's like a little typewriter that just has a little screen. It's really, really tiny. It's like, a couple inches tall, and it's really tiny. But every time I use it, and it's light and portable, really long battery life, I love it because I always know what I'm going to do. I'm going to write. And I don't find myself distracted. I never, ever find myself on YouTube when I'm using that, or Twitter or whatever. So I just specifically write on that. And I actually will take this with me and write in the car. And I'll write in the car, and then I'll go into the gym. And I love it because then once I've done that, it's like, okay, I've got my writing done and I've worked out. I'm raring to go because I have 2 huge wins kind of under my belt. And I just find that the distraction is so bad for me personally with social media and, the internet and tab browsing and all of that, where it just gets really distracting. It's really hard to get much done. You want to hop around. Whenever I catch myself hopping around, you know what I mean by the hop around?
Definitely.
It's bad, and I think that's what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, it's true. Now that you've mentioned the first draft, let's talk about this a little. For me personally, it's definitely the toughest experience. I love plotting, I love editing, I love polishing the drafts, but the first draft is something that's driving me insane, and I'm in the process of writing first draft right now. So,
okay, I'm with you. I got you. Yeah.
Why do you feel is that, and how can we manage to get through this first draft?
For most people, I think we've been misled with the writing process. I know myself included for sure. Especially if you see writing in a movie where it's like, hey, that person goes off, they write, they come back with a stack of pages, and I think we're expecting it to be easy, and we're taking out the rewriting, editing process altogether because it's not in the mix. It's I get it all right the first time. So maybe it's a perfectionism thing, you're wanting to get it right the first time, and it's supposed to be pretty easy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And now, it sounds like you plot, so you have a plan. I think I think it's like if you plot or plan and then those plans change in the context of your first draft, that can be a little frustrating. I think that could be, again, that perfectionism thing where, I mean, most artists, we're perfectionists if we're really honest, right? So I think that could be it where it's like, okay, this is my plan in my head. I have it going A, B, C, D. All this is my plan. And when you write it and it becomes B, A, C, F, E. And it's like it's different and you're like, more decision making. I'm not sure. I mean, that's for me. I think that's one of them where it's like, this is confusing and it's hard and it's a little messier than you expect it to be.
So how can you get through that? How can you manage to write the first draft?
Be okay with it not being okay. I really think that's it. I think be okay with it not being right the first time, not being correct the first time. And a friend of mine who I spoke with pretty recently, she said it's like the first draft is really just moving the sand into the sandbox. And I love that. I love the visualness of that. It's like, okay, we're moving all the sand into the sandbox. Notice we're not even playing with the sand, really. We're moving it in. So it's like you're getting a lot of words on the page, and it's like getting all the supplies you need. You need those words. It's like, but you're not going to be able to do that much with it. You might have one idea, like it's one idea here in the corner and one idea over here, but it's not going to look like a perfect sandcastle. Not yet. I mean, you might have an idea, or you might, but I think that's where like the revision process comes in. And I think, yeah, be okay with it not being perfect, just being messy. I think that's the way to.
Yeah. But it can be quite hard because we have this inner critic, that tends to bother us all the time. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But that's what the revision and editing process is for, right? Let's talk a little bit about your tips and tricks to get the best out of the first draft after it's finished and survive revision.
Okay, now this is a lot harder, again, with fiction. with nonfiction, it's a little bit more straightforward. I'm not going to say it's easy because it's never easy, right? It's writing. It's not going to be super easy. I think that's where you have to go to some kind of guide. And for me, I absolutely love this book called Story Maps. I have it next to me because I'm literally going to use it later. I'm kind of in this revising process now, even in my current book. I think having some kind of structure to hold up as a guide is really important. And this is my favorite book as far as like story structure goes, and just getting the order right. I think that's the important part. Like, you have to get that first act really down before you can really get that second act and third act. I mean, it's because, as you know, a story, it's all connected. You're not going to have, if you, like, I've heard the rumor that a third act problem is really a first act problem in your story, because it's like, okay, well, it just keeps building. It builds from the beginning. If you have a problem at the beginning, you don't want to have to redo the whole thing. So I would say make sure your beginning is a good solid foundation. And make sure it's, something you can build on. That it's like, okay, I have a great opening, a compelling, inciting incident, like where this really propels the whole story forward. And then having, as the story unfolds, like it's going to get more compelling. You're going to make it literally get worse and worse for your hero as you go. And I think some stories, if like, let's just say a story that wasn't doing too well or just it wasn't formatted properly, you might have a really great opening, but then it kind of goes backwards and it goes down and it doesn't like build on it. It's just, the great strong opening, it really shouldn't have been the opening because this opening's so high. Maybe you should go a little bit lower in the action or on the first incident and make sure it just goes in order. Because I was thinking about a story. I'm trying to give you a specific example off the top of my head. Well, Jurassic Park. I just watched that movie recently. When you open up that story I'm talking the movie because I haven't read the whole book completely, but just the opening, it builds and builds and builds as you go. And it's like, as it opens up, it doesn't open up with a Tyrannosaurus Rex like attacking somebody at the very beginning. The T-Rex doesn't come in until like halfway through the movie.
Okay.
And the Velociraptor, they talk about him all throughout the movie, and guess what? They're building for the very end, the climax, Act 3. So it's like it continually builds on it. It doesn't like come with mini dinosaurs attacking everybody at the beginning. It starts with one raptor that you don't see, just to really get the viewer, to get interested into it, and then it just kind of keeps building slowly from there. We know as the viewer that there is danger connected to the island, but nobody else knows about the danger as far as the heroes are concerned until an hour into the movie. And as the reader, as a viewer, you're seeing it unfold, but you don't want to have it like too much up front, and then it's like, well, this is boring. It's not going anywhere. Well, there's nowhere to go if you start everything turned up at 10 at the beginning. And I think in context of this, just as a practical example, maybe in this case, if you're writing a story and you're like, this is happening, you move that opening, and instead of it being an opening, maybe it becomes your midpoint, or, you're building toward that, and that it could even be a climax. I mean, it could definitely get moved.
Yeah, so how many revisions do you tend to do normally?
Oh, boy. I'm actually my first novel, so this is the challenging one for me. I think I'm going to be doing 3, and this is the first time, like, I'm further along than I've ever been. But I think that there's always that perfectionism factor. I think 3 is a pretty good rule of thumb from other authors I've spoken with as well. I do think a lot of it does depend on your planning process.
Yeah, definitely.
How familiar you are really with your story structure. And also I would say, too, you're based on feedback from beta readers and your editor. That's another important part. I think 3 is the perfect number because the first draft is just going to be really, really rough and messy. I can attest to this for sure because I'm going through mine.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm pulling it out. Like my friend Emily mentioned, it's like having a bulldozer in a sandbox. You're just taking stuff away. So the rough draft is just really, really rough. The first real draft is the second draft, and then the third becomes the polishing and kind of the tweaking and perfecting. So I think 3 makes a lot of sense. Again, the assumption is that you have good story structure, because if you don't have good story structure, you kind of have to say, well, you know what? That's okay. I'll start over once I get my story squared away, and I'll just do 3 from there. And just kind of, and also 3 is achievable. When somebody says I have 10 drafts or whatever, that's not that many revisions. I think people can't do that, frankly, because it just gets so difficult. And even if you had to do it over a few times, that's okay. But you can say, okay, well, this is the first rough draft, gives you some grace because it's not going to be right. That second draft of it, then you can really work with it and give yourself an idea where you're really at.
Okay, yeah, great. And now with the last area for the struggling artist, keeping momentum. Why is that? Why is it so difficult for writers to keep momentum, and how can we manage that?
I'm an emotional person. Like, I really feel things pretty deep, and I think a lot of artists are this way. And I think first and foremost, you've got to be really honest with yourself. And like say, I'm not saying like talk to yourself and be like, I feel this, I feel that. But really just being honest with yourself and saying, I'm not feeling inspired. I'm feeling kind of drained, or I'm feeling a little bit frustrated. I think just accepting it and just saying, okay, I know I'm operating at a 6 out of 10. That's something I would do to myself. Say, okay, I'm feeling like a 6 out of 10. All right, what can I do to feel more, at least like an 8 out of 10? What can I do? Any simple little steps. And for me, one big one is, have I worked out? I think we often ignore the emotional benefits of working out, physical activity. I think that's a big one. I think as artists, it's like I've fought this battle many times. No, I need to write. I need to work on my book. No, I need to work on my book. And if you go to run a race, but you're already tired, it's going to be really, really difficult, and you're going to get frustrated. So now if you're like, okay, well, I know I have to run a race, and that's fine. What if I can get some energy before the race? What if I could read a book that I really enjoy for 5 minutes just to get inspired? Even better, what if I read part of my manuscript that I enjoy just for 5 minutes? Again, set a timer, give yourself, some kind of boundary. Reading a part you've written that you enjoy will fire you up. It'll get you going, because you'll be like, ooh, yeah, I like that scene. I like that part. Yeah, that's why I'm doing this, right? And I think that's a huge part for momentum. And also, you're writing a book for a reason. You got a story to tell. Even if you don't like your story that you have so far, you could read another story that's really inspired you, that caused you to want to write the story. 5 minutes. You can watch a clip on YouTube for 5 minutes. But again, you have to set the timer. That's the warning. That's the timer. But get inspired. Get yourself pumped up. I think that would help a lot for momentum. I think it helps me a lot. And even to make it just even more applicable as a writer, as an artist, if you write out part of that story that you enjoy, I think that'll help you get your fingers going. Just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a story, a chapter that you really enjoyed that someone else has even written, just to get your fingers going, just to get the flow of it going, especially if you're doing dialogue. I think that could help if you're doing dialogue, as far as I think a lot of beginning writers really struggle with dialogue, and sometimes their characters even sound a lot alike. You could always find the screenplay. Find the screenplay, Google it, you'll find the screenplay. Set that timer, 5 minutes, just typing pieces of that. I think that's a great way just to get you, good little exercise to get you going. And lastly, for momentum, you've got to have some kind of support. You have to have some kind of guidance or mentor or friend that you can talk to. And I think a lot of writers want to just kind of live in their own little bubble. I'm guilty of this. Or I'm naming myself here. If you're too isolated, it's hard to be encouraged.
Yes.
So talk to another writer friend, talk to someone who's encouraging, and just talking with them, you might come up with better ideas. You might figure out your real problem. I find that all the time. That's why I love meeting friends for coffee. I would figure out my own problem and be like, that's it. I've been thinking this, but I haven't said it out loud. And you can have really good ideas, and that might jumpstart that whole idea and be like, I know what I have to do. I just figured it out from talking to you and kind of conversing with you.
Yeah. I love that how you mentioned copying things, because I just yesterday I read about how Jack London used to copy parts of books that he loved to figure out why they worked. I was so amazed about that. And the community thing, I think if you can, you should join a local writing group, right? Because this is so encouraging. I just recently read about the Inklings in Oxford, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and it's so amazing how they inspired each other. And I think if you find people who can inspire you, like you said, it's amazing. So you have a very exciting event coming up, right, at the end of August. You'll finish your book summit.
Yes.
And I
So now,
love that title because it's so on point about, yeah, I just finished this thing. It sounds so motivating. Tell us more about the event and why you decided to host it.
yeah, I it's basically an online event where you sign up, and I spoke with 15 different authors, all different kinds of authors, a couple screenwriters, some fiction writers, nonfiction writers, where I just wanted to hone in on all the real problems that
Mm.
I personally I have experienced all of these problems, and like okay, I'm a writer. I know I've had these problems. I think these are the real, you know, areas that people struggle with, and just to really dig deeper with some authors who've written over 60 books. So
Mm.
I've just talked with a few of them, and I've just met with them, and I've just really tried to pick their brain and dig deeper and get their advice for another author who, you know, has a half finished book. And I've been able to speak with just some fantastic best-selling authors, and the event's completely free, you know, for a limited time where you can get, you know, like a few, actually some of them are friends of mine that I've met before, that I've spoken with. Some of them I've just connected with, you know, online, and you know they live on the other side of the world from me,
Mm.
but I've been able to talk with them and just really dig deeper and figure out the real problems, because I think it's we actually experience the same problems as authors, and that's why we have
Mm.
a book that's half finished. How can we actually finish that book? And until we finish a book, we can't even say if it's good or bad or anything. It's not complete. It's like a half finished painting. You can't really have an opinion on it. It's like, well, I don't know. We don't know if it's good or bad, because it's like it's half there, and you're not sure necessarily even what you're looking at when it's a half finished painting.
Mm.
And it's just been an awesome time. I determined to do this because I thought to myself, worst case scenario, I learned something. Worst case possible scenario, I learned something. And also, worst case scenario, I helped some people finish their books. And it's been a fantastic experience as far as just talking to all these different authors and really learning from them. I a few of them, I just have to mention a few names because a few of them are New York Times bestsellers.
Mm.
John Acuff is one of the most encouraging, inspiring people I've ever met. He
Mm.
played a huge part in my personal journey as becoming a writer, and he's like a four-time New York bestseller. And I was able to pick his brain really on momentum. And even better, he wrote a book called Finish, which I was like, ooh, this is great. He has some real insights on this, like how do you actually finish? So he was like the very first email I sent. I was like, I got to talk to him about this, because I think a lot of authors have half-finished manuscripts. We lose a little momentum. That
Yeah.
perfectionist bug gets in our ear, and we say, oh, this isn't any good. No. Oh, but I like this idea over here, this other new idea,
Mm.
this bright, shiny new idea. And we jump from one book to the other.
Mhm.
That was my story. And I didn't really mention this earlier, but that was completely my story. I had a bunch of half-finished ebooks.
Mm.
Finally, I connected with a friend of mine named Eric Fisher. And I said, hey, I'm working on this book. I've got this great book idea. And he's like, hey, I've been thinking about writing a book. Well, I partnered up with him to co-author my first book, because
Mm.
I was like 60, 70% there. And I thought, what if I jump on board with him and we combine, you know, kind of like peanut butter and jelly sandwich, we combine together. That's what it took for me to finish.
Mm.
That was what it took for me to finish, because I had, you know, deadlines and accountability, and I had that support community. That was a huge piece of it for me. And so I'm kind of trying to offer that to other authors, because I get it. I mean, this is my story. I bet it was 12 ebooks that I started and stopped and then kind of abandoned before I got to that very first one.
Yeah, I think this is honestly the problem of every author, especially when it comes to the first book, isn't it? So after
Yeah.
you finish one book, it's easier to finish the second, but the first book is such a struggle. It really
Yes.
is. Yeah. So where can people register for this event? It sounds amazing.
Thank you so much. Finishyourbooksummit.com. Just
Oh, great.
finishyourbooksummit.com. There's the webpage there with more of the authors. Again, there's going to be 15, probably more. That's a secret. Probably even more than 15. That you can just sign up. I'll let you know when the event is happening. It's going to happen the 27th through 31st, I believe, of August, the last week of August.
Yeah.
And I will notify you. It's going to be in 5 different modules that we've really talked about already in this interview. And just trying to diagnose the problems. And it's possible. I mean, I know a lot of us experience probably all 5 of these areas if we're struggling with them at some point in time. But just to figure out, okay, what are some good practical ways I can finish my book?
Yeah, so great. I'm definitely participating. And where can people find you and your work?
JimWoodsWrites.com. JimWoodsWrites.com.
And you have several nonfiction books, right?
Yes, I do. I have a few, and they're basically productivity. But let's be honest, I'm a writer. I'm really writing for other writers, and it's just the honest truth. The first one's called Ready, Aim, Fire, and it's all about accomplishing your goals, kind of taking that, step-by-step approach to accomplish your goal. And the second one is called Focus Booster, which we've kind of talked about already, where it's like we're so distracted. How can we boost our mental energy and our focus levels?
Love that. Yes, thank you so much for doing this interview. It was so helpful. So many great tips I think we can all put into practice in our writing life. Yeah, it was amazing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.